I'm back again. Doesn't seem like it's been a week, but yeah, it has. Um, this week's topic, as you listeners would know, I try and keep things current and try and give you as much current information, legal information as possible. Sometimes maybe a bit too much to digest, but I'm here to help if you need assistance in digesting it. Um, so today's topic is going to be consumer contracts, and we'll also be touching on commercial leases during COVID 19. Now, as for consumer contracts, obviously there's a lot going on at the moment in relation to, I don't know, the travel industry, maybe a bit about landlord and tenants, and maybe weddings and all of that. So, I have with me today a commercial and civil litigation solicitor who goes by the name of Gavin Ward. Gavin, you are here with us today. Hello.
Hi
And
there, how are you?
welcome to the show. You have been with us once before.
I have, it's my second run.
Yeah, well, we like to anyone that we like to bring back. So you've obviously
Fair
been
enough.
good, and you have obviously given good information in the last time you were here. So thank you for coming back. So, Gavin, today, as I mentioned to the listeners, we are covering consumer contracts.
Mm.
So, can we start maybe with travel advice? I mean, there's been a lot of changes since even yesterday.
Yeah.
Are you up to speed with that? And can
Well,
you tell us where?
it's a very movable feast,
Mm,
and it is rather fast moving. And I think the position is probably changing all the time, really.
hmm
The situation's been that since March, the Foreign and Commonwealth officers advised people to stay in the UK unless there's an essential reason to travel outside of the country.
hmm
Um, Locally in the devolved administrations, things have been even more different than that. I think Wales and Scotland had a 5 mile limit in terms of travel from your home throughout the large extent of that lockdown. So it's varied even more even internally from that. Either way, it's caused a large shutdown in aviation and the hospitality sector, and that's caused a lot of businesses to need to put staff onto either furlough or to look at whether or not they have to make redundancies there.
hmm hmm
In early June, there was a period where, well, from that early June, there was a period where they put restrictions needed for people coming back into the country. So they were asking people to quarantine, self-isolate themselves. This was without any government intervention itself. So
hmm
people were just being asked to stay in their homes for 14 days, not go out, not interact with anybody else, go straight from the airport to your home. 14 days after that, if you're not ill at all, then you can go back amongst the people within social distancing rules and lockdown rules, but you're able to sort of re-emerge back into the population, as it were.
Sure.
From yesterday, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office advice has slightly eased. So there's still a restriction there that people in the UK should stay in the UK unless their travel is essential, except for a particular list of countries. Now, at the moment, there's a list of anywhere between 59 and 66 countries, and it depends on the source that you look at as to how many it is.
hmm
Most of them are island nations, so that they're fairly small populations, and it's more easily controlled, I suppose, the virus in those areas. So that's why they.
Yeah, I was thinking, how can they say that there is a reduced risk there? Because the risk is everywhere.
The risk is literally everywhere. I mean,
Mm.
you've got Canada, which is one of the largest countries in the world, and Germany is quite a large country as well, and those are on the list of exceptions there, but I think they've been able to handle the pandemic better.
Mm.
Also, France is on the list too. So you're able to travel to those countries, but if you return before the 10th of July, you'll still be subject to those 14-day restrictions, so you'll still need to
Sure.
self-isolate. From the 10th of July, those restrictions on quarantine for the countries on the list won't apply. So people returning from the 10th of July from France, from New Zealand, from Denmark, from Gibraltar or Greece. They won't have to worry about that at all. They'll be able to carry on as normal and won't need to quarantine on return.
Well, they are the countries that you mentioned do seem to be the countries which are most visited by us Brits.
Yeah, and Spain's on the list as well. Interestingly, Portugal is not on the list. My understanding is that there was a local outbreak there, which is fairly sort of similar scale to the situation in Leicester. However, they've opted to not put them on the list as a result of that. Albeit Portugal's generally had a good record in terms of the pandemic, so it's a bit of an oddity in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this is England-only changes too. So if you're in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland at the moment, the travel restrictions remain. So this list of countries doesn't apply if you live in Scotland, you live in Wales or you live in Northern Ireland. The advice is still not to travel to those countries. It may well be that advice changes by the 10th of July. I think Scotland's moving in a direction where they might agree. I'm unclear as to whether Wales or the Northern Irish.
What stops anyone from, say, Wales or Scotland coming over the border? Say Scotland, for instance, coming over the border, jumping on the plane at Manchester, going away, coming back, and then not having a quarantine.
Literally nothing, because it's not being properly enforced. There's no real enforcement here. It's all very much a voluntary situation.
Yeah.
It's ordered by. It's not a case of you're breaching the law, and if the police are called to your property as a result of it, that you'll be arrested and you could face a fine, or you could face criminal penalties for it. I mean, there are penalties that the police can put on you for breaching the social distancing rules under the COVID-19 regulations. But in terms of this, I don't think there's much they can do unless there's actual evidence to suggest that you haven't self-isolated for the 14 days on returning when you're supposed to. But how easy will it be to prove that? They'll have needed to have reported in, surely, to suggest that they were coming back for that. So it's a tricky one in that respect.
So you've mentioned these countries that coming back from. How about going to?
Well, you don't get counted out. Is the thing when you leave the UK, you don't get counted out the country. You only get counted back in. So you only have to go through border control on the way in and not on the way out. So you only have to scan your boarding pass to leave the UK.
Right. Okay. Interesting. No, I'm just thinking. Well, okay, we're lifting those restrictions coming in here, but if for instance, I wanted to go to Italy, is one of the ones that's on the list. What will happen over there? Do they put you in quarantine over there at the moment if you're coming from the UK?
So it's not necessarily a reciprocal arrangement. So we might be on a list here, and we might be, they might say, we say it's okay for you to travel to those countries if you want to. But, for instance, if you were to fly over to somewhere like Australia or New Zealand, they are largely not accepting foreign visitors at all at the moment, except in exceptional circumstances.
Right.
And you might find that whilst we will be okay with people going over there, they're not okay to receive us. So that will probably just mean that there's no flights going over because they won't allow it.
Right.
But also you might find that, say, if you were going, and I know South Korea was quite good on wanting to have quarantines for people coming into their country at one point. So it might well be that you'll be faced with having a week or a 2-week quarantine on arrival into different countries. And if you're only going away for 2 weeks, you don't get a holiday. Really, you go to another country to quarantine and then you come back. So it's
maybe you quarantine in better weather.
Quarantine in better weather. I don't know about better conditions, though. You don't know where they're putting everybody.
Yeah.
So that could prove to be a difficult one for that purpose in itself. And that's something that travel companies are going to have to take into consideration, really, when they're allowing people to go on holiday.
Well, on the basis of this, so I think we should discuss insurance. Would your insurance cover your travel?
Yeah, so that's a minefield in itself, the travel insurance section. So if you've taken out an annual policy of insurance, say in January, before all of this became a problem, and it was just considered to be a normal travel insurance year, and normal restrictions applied, you probably would be covered for things like cancellation and such. You'd have to check your terms of your policy carefully to see if whether or not a pandemic or some sort of significant epidemic of infectious disease in a particular area that you're intending to travel to might invalidate your policy or restrict certain coverage under your policy. It's always worth checking that out before you travel. But if you are buying insurance now, it's likely that your travel insurance policy is going to not want to cover you for anything COVID related, really. Some policies will allow it for if you fell ill whilst you're abroad to ensure that you get medical treatment. But any coronavirus related claims like cancellations and quarantines or other restrictions that might be placed on you as a result of, say, being in a foreign country and them having to do a lockdown or something along those lines, they're probably not going to cover you for those things.
Right.
Because there's a chance that it could be considered to be force majeure under certain terms of the contract in any case, or it's a specific exclusion. So you could fall into difficulties, unfortunately, if you went down that route.
Right. And what if, talking about insurance again, we should maybe focus on cancellations and refunds. Is there, if I've got a trip booked, can I cancel and get a refund?
Possibly is the answer to that one, and it's going to depend on a number of factors for it. And the Foreign and Commonwealth Office advice is going to be fairly key there, because that's what a lot of the airlines and insurance companies will base their advice on as to whether or not they can cancel it. So it's going to be a reduced capacity with travel companies in any case. I think a lot of them, particularly TUI, is doing a very reduced package holiday operation from July onwards, and it's only going to be to specific destinations. For instance, Greece is quite a popular package holiday destination, but we've got them on our list from yesterday, so you're okay to travel to that country. However, they're not happy to receive us until at least the 15th of July at the moment, at the earliest.
It's not long, though. Not long.
Yeah, not long, but there's still another 10 days to go before they're happy to receive anybody. So that means, at the very least, package holidays to Greece couldn't commence until at least the 15th of July in any case. So you'd probably be under the right there to contact your travel company and talk to them about cancelling, securing a refund, or rebooking the holiday for another time. A lot of companies will want to go for the option of rebooking or offering you vouchers first, before offering you a refund, because it's a cash flow issue, really. And I think it's been reported that Ryanair is somewhat behind with its payments back to its customers. Flights that it hasn't been able to deliver throughout the pandemic, and some people could find that they're waiting quite a while to get that refund. So it might be that if they can move the dates, and if they still want to travel later in the month, that might work for them, and it might be a quicker option for them to come through. But as it stands, provided that the holidays are able to go ahead, and I think that is the important thing, and it's a two-way process. So the Foreign and Commonwealth Office advice needs to say it's okay to go and to do this, and the travel company needs to be able to appropriately provide the services under the holiday contract for it. So you're going to need to be able to leave your plane and get on a transfer, go to your hotel, and have the experience of your holiday, and not find that you arrive at the airport and everyone's shipped off on a coach to quarantine for 2 weeks. So that's an important factor as to what will happen on the other side, I think, for you.
Sure.
But there are going to be people out there who aren't going to want to travel. They're not going to want to go on holiday because of this pandemic, and they're going to be worried about the prospect of catching the disease whilst they're away, and bringing it back with them. And there's a risk there, really, if the Foreign and Commonwealth Office advice is that you can travel, and if the country receiving you is happy to receive you and say it's fine and you won't have those restrictions placed on you, say for quarantine and such, and you could have the holiday as contracted for, then you might be in difficult waters with your travel company if you wanted to say, look, I don't want to go. Now, I think, and I'll use the example of TUI here. I know at one point they were saying to people if they didn't feel comfortable travelling at the moment, then they would be entitled to change the date within a certain period of time, and they could move their holiday around to maybe go next year instead if they wanted to,
Yeah.
or in a couple of months' time if there was availability. And I think it is subject to availability really for them to be able to do that. That's trying to keep the customers and to best accommodate them as much as they can. But they would be within their right if the customer wanted to say no, I want a refund under those circumstances. They could say no to them, and
Right.
they would be right to do so under the contract that the customer has entered into with them. So they could turn and say, well, no, we don't have to provide you with a refund for it because we can provide the holiday as you'd asked, and it is safe to go according to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the receiving country is happy to receive you, and there won't be restrictions in terms of a quarantine, so we can provide services to you. So there's no reason why you can't go. It's just a factor that you're worried about going in that
Yeah.
respect.
Okay.
And travel insurance isn't going to cover you for that either. So that's going to be a difficult one.
I'm going to move on to weddings, but before I do so, if anyone has any questions in relation to any consumer contracts, whether it's COVID related or not, you're welcome, and also commercial leases, you're welcome to either call the studio with your question on 01902 972 150 or WhatsApp your questions via WhatsApp on 07 440 420 432. That's 07 440 420 432. And those of you who are watching us live on Facebook, if you want to, you can add your questions in the comments. I have my Facebook open, so I'm happy to read them off there. Or our numbers are on the screen in front of you. Thank you. Right, so moving on to weddings. That's been a thing on a lot of people who've been looking to get married this summer. Having to cancel their weddings. So now with lockdown easing, and we are where we are now with even pubs opening, etc., and restaurants. So can you cancel or rearrange the big day then?
Well, that's going to be, it's an interesting one as well, because it depends on where you are in the UK too. So if you're in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, the advice would be different than it is here necessarily. So they might allow for smaller amounts of groups to gather. As I mentioned earlier, there has recently, I think it's recently been lifted, at least in Wales, to prevent people from travelling any further than 5 miles from their home. So having the big day can be very difficult in those circumstances, particularly if you lived, for instance, more than 5 miles away from where you were intending to hold the wedding. So it could prove difficult. But also there's the restrictions on the number of people that will be allowed to attend the venue for it. There's been strict numbers placed on gatherings so far. And I think really the weddings are only going to be sort of kicking off probably now, I would imagine, moving forward. It's sort of from the 4th of July onwards as they're starting to reopen hospitality.
I think this is going to affect the Asians quite a bit, because I don't know whether you've ever been to an Asian wedding, Gavin, but
quite a lot of people attend. A lot
the
more
smallest
than
one I've been to is probably 300-400 people.
Yeah.
So I've seen some with nearly maybe 1,000. So yeah, this will definitely affect them and the venues that they've booked.
Well, this is it, and the venues will be booked up, and they'll be pushing to try to get people not to cancel, and they might well be seeking people to say rebook it for later in the year or next year instead if they were pushing for a refund. And those could be good negotiating points, because depending on your position on your wedding insurance, and some people take
that's another thing that a lot of people don't even know about wedding insurance. Again, in the Asian community, I'm not sure whether many people are even advised on wedding insurance.
Well, this is it, and weddings are usually planned well in advance
Mm.
of actually taking place. So there's possibly, at the moment, at the very least, quite a lot of people that will have had, if they have taken out wedding insurance or been advised to take out wedding insurance, have taken it out before the pandemic, so before mid-March,
Mm-hmm.
and they might find that those policies are a bit more giving in terms of the coverage than new policies. I know that a lot of insurers were refusing to take on applications for wedding insurance during the lockdown, and some haven't returned to providing it now. Others are expressly excluding any future bans on large groups, so effectively disqualifying policyholders from receiving any kind of a refund there as well. And they might only give coverage where there's actually been infection of COVID-19 for, say, someone like the bride, the groom, or someone significant in the wedding party, rather than an actual fear of infection. So people being concerned about having a couple of hundred people coming together, or people saying, well, we don't think we can attend because we're worried about the virus. And then everyone saying, well, maybe it's just best that we put this off to a date where everyone will feel comfortable attending.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to the insurer about that is, under the current circumstances, if it's a relatively new policy post-pandemic, is unlikely to be covered. And I would check your policy documents very carefully for anything before the pandemic, just in case that isn't covered either. It's a bit of a difficult position. Insurers, they effectively like to back circumstances where they're not going to lose a tremendous amount of money. And I suppose because all the policyholders are putting money into the big pot for it, and it's all based, and the premiums are based on the level of risk.
Yeah.
The risk initially is relatively low or moderate, potentially, depending, but the premiums make up for the potential risk involved to some extent. So you're never giving out more money than you're taking in, which is what the insurance pot should always be. In the current circumstances, the insurance pot could be paying out a lot more than it actually
took in, yeah.
Exactly. So it's a significant risk there, and insurers aren't supposed to provide insurance products where that is potentially the risk, because then there's the risk that the insurers won't be able to afford to pay out for people in any case. So it's worth being careful there. I would suggest your first point of call is talk to your wedding venue, talk to your suppliers, see what can be done in terms of rearranging things. Try to do it as well in advance as you possibly can. Start communications early, because you're more likely to get a positive response than coming to them towards the last minute. Check your policy documents of insurance whilst you're doing that, because you want a good backup position for it, and making sure that if push comes to shove, then you can make a decision to try to make a claim on your insurance for the wedding, and then move it on to and do it on another date if need be, if you're unable to deal with your suppliers and your venue sufficiently.
Where would they stand as far as trying to get their deposit back?
Well, the deposit might be unrefundable. It depends what happens with the terms and conditions with the venue or with the various suppliers. But if you've got insurance in place, it might allow you to recover that money if the wedding hasn't been able to go ahead. So if you had a wedding in April or in March, late March, I suspect you'll probably be more successful with receiving a refund from your insurer then than you would be if you had one in, say, May or June. And if you'd taken out the policy in May or June, that is, should I say, because it's later on, it's within the pandemic, and it's at that point it's very difficult to see what sort of coverage that they might want to provide, because they'll want to exclude as much as they can in terms of the pandemic, because they know they'll just have to pay out too much. It's a similar situation with the venues and the suppliers, really. They'll probably have made in their T's and C's that deposits might be non-refundable, and you're agreeing to that if you don't go ahead. So you might be risking, say, losing a couple of £1,000 by trying to secure the place for the venue for a future date, and taking that risk. And they may have suggested then that you take out insurance to cover a potential cancellation in the future. So that there are risks involved there, and there are big risks that you might lose out. I mean, there is always the doctrine of frustration, which is something I was going to come on to more for commercial leases. But
I think that's we've only got, for this segment, we've got 40 odd seconds left. So the doctrine of frustration will be frustrated if we don't give it the credit it deserves. So we'll leave that till after
commercial property.
Commercial property. But no, I suppose the insurances are going to be trying to pay out as little as possible, whether it's for these weddings or whether it's for holidays, etc. They're looking for the loopholes.
It's possible, I suppose you could look at a Section 75 chargeback if you purchased it through a credit card.
Oh yes, of course.
That'd be through consumer credit tax.
So, Gavin, we've got 5 seconds, so we'll speak to you after the break. Thank you. Keep with us.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Welcome to the second half of the legal clinic with me, Ajaz Ali. I'm here in the studio with a guest on the line, Gavin Ward, who is a commercial and civil litigation solicitor. In the first half, we have been discussing quite interesting points, actually. We've been discussing travel advice. Gavin has told us about travel where we can, why we can, where we can't go and travel to, when we can travel. He then went on to talk about travel insurance, and then we spoke about weddings uh, during these times. Gavin, are you with us still?
Hi, yeah, still with you, Ajaz.
Hi. Um, Gavin, do you want to do a quick recap before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, sure. So, starting off with travel insurance, then there has been a change in advice from yesterday in terms of the current Foreign and Commonwealth Office advice against all but essential reasons to leave the UK. There's now a list of between 59 and 66 different countries, including British Overseas Territories, which we are permitted now to fly to. That advice is effectively England only at the moment, and Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales have yet to decide whether or not they want to follow the same approach with it. 14-day quarantine on return still applies until the 10th of July, at which point anyone returning from countries on the list will not need to quarantine, as they're deemed to be a relatively reduced risk from the virus. It may well be that by the 10th of July that Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales have agreed, or some of them will agree to the same list and to the same points of restriction, but that's not entirely clear as yet. The risks there to consumers are somewhat numerous, really. You could be in a position whereby you could travel to another country and they want to pop you in a quarantine for a couple of weeks before they'll let you out into the general population.
Mm-hmm.
That will probably prohibit travel companies from wanting to do package holidays to those countries, as usually people are going away for a week or two, and really all they'll be offering people is a week or two's quarantine, perhaps in the sun. So that's unlikely to happen. That'll probably lead to travel companies offering refunds, rebookings or vouchers in relation to that. Travel insurance, on that point. Travel insurance takes similar cues as the aviation and tour operators, really. So they look to the Foreign Commonwealth Office to see whether or not it's okay to travel, and if it's deemed okay to travel, that'll be one of the points as to whether or not there will be coverage under the policy. If you travel when there's restrictions on travel to that particular country, then there's likelihood is that the policy will be void. But you might also find that it's difficult to get any coronavirus-related claims through for cancellations, quarantines or other restrictions where the policies have been taken out since the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
People who have taken out travel insurance pre-pandemic might find that the terms and conditions are a touch more relaxed there, albeit they should check the policy documents carefully to see if there's any particular exclusions for pandemics.
Right. Okay. And then moving on. We discussed weddings and cancellations.
Yeah. So it is somewhat difficult because there's different restrictions in different parts of the UK at the moment in terms of the size of gatherings that can take place and whether or not weddings are part of those guidelines. Social distancing has to be met in any case.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who will have planned their big day for quite a good many months, if not a couple of years, might find that guests are not keen on coming along, and that coupled in with the restrictions might cause people to want to put it off for another day.
Okay.
Difficulties there is that whether or not the venues and the suppliers are willing to do so. they've had to take a hit on their cash flow and their income over a long period of time if they're having to put back a particular booking or a list of bookings for a couple of months because people are still nervous about doing it, or they want a larger group of people to attend a particular event, then there's going to be some difficulty with that, and it'll be for the consumer really to have a good look at the contract they've entered into with their suppliers, with the venue, to see whether or not moving the booking is going to be possible, whether or not their deposit will be refundable under the contract, and also to consider whether or not any wedding insurance they may have taken out might assist them. Wedding insurance pre-pandemic, similar to the travel side of things, is more likely to provide better coverage than insurance that was taken out during the pandemic, with many insurers at the moment not providing coverage,
Sure.
or not accepting applications for wedding insurance because they deem the risk to be just too high at the moment. And a lot of insurers that are providing cover now will only provide it for an actual infection rather than a fear of infection, and they also won't cover for future ban on large groups, which would mean that any policyholder wouldn't qualify for a refund.
Right. Okay. Right. Shall we move on now? Thanks for the recap. The next point I wanted to cover was rented accommodation. I wanted to briefly touch on this before moving on to the commercial stuff.
Okay.
So if someone moving out of rented accommodation but suffered COVID-19 symptoms before the move,
Yeah.
your advice there, please.
Well, it's a difficult one. So you're potentially in a situation where you might have to stay in the property for longer than you'd intended because you'll be forced to isolate if you've got COVID-19 symptoms, and you won't be able to move. So it may well be that you'll end up having to pay additional rent to the landlord for the period of which you would be still occupying the property. I have heard stories that landlords are trying to charge tenants for deep cleaning of properties as a result of the end of the tenancy. So that's above and beyond the usual sort of returning the property in the clean, tidy condition that you should have received it in at the early.
Surely that's not part of their contract, is it?
Exactly. So it's not part of their contract for that. However, there are some ASTs, should I say, the short-hold tenancy agreements and other leases that might have clauses in there that are a bit more general in terms of what the landlord is able to recover at the end of a tenancy. And it's always worth having a good look at your tenancy agreement just to see if there is any sort of sweeping obligation to indemnify the landlord against unforeseen costs. There's also been an instance that I've read that a landlord has sought to recover hotel expenses for an incoming tenant if they weren't able to occupy a property which the existing tenant should have moved out of. And they wanted to recover that and deep cleaning costs from those tenants who were seeking to move on. But it's questionable as to whether or not that would be recoverable. I think that is above and beyond the terms of certainly what was foreseeable in the lease when it was originally being taken out. Often deposits are placed in a deposit protection scheme. Say, for instance, with the Deposit Protection Service, there is a free dispute resolution service through them, and if a landlord is seeking to make unreasonable deductions at the end of a tenancy as a result of, say, doing a deep clean or seeking other additional costs which seem particularly unreasonable to the tenant, then they could take that dispute through the resolution service. And it's a bit like a conciliation service. So both sides will present their evidence and written submissions. You may, if you're a tenant, do it in the format of a letter, or you might get a lawyer to do a more of a formal document.
Yeah, with this deep clean business, I recall someone approaching me for an oven deep clean. They'd just moved out. They claimed that they had scrubbed the oven clean and it left it in a much cleaner state than it initially was when they took on the property. But the agent still billed them, I think at the time it was £50 or something, to clean the oven. And so they said, well, where do I stand? And I said, well, you can argue it with them, but obviously it'll cost you more to come through me.
Well, this is it. I mean, it would cost more to argue it through a lawyer than it would to argue it themselves, really. And the best thing that tenants can do when they're entering and leaving a property is, before you move your stuff in, take pictures of what the current condition looks like, particularly something like the oven, which is always a contentious issue. And make sure that when you're leaving and you're taking everything out, you equally take those pictures again, particularly of something like the oven, or areas of the bathroom and things like that where there could be a particular mess, and you want to be able to prove that actually you did do what you said you did, and there wasn't any need for them to bring in cleaners or to incur these additional costs just for the sakes of it, effectively, and just to add an extra deduction to someone's deposit.
Yeah, that's some good advice for new tenants and maybe students, because
students particularly who get caught out quite a lot, I suspect, in terms of when it comes to cleaning and leaving accommodation in the end. But sometimes, I mean, I've moved into, when I was a student, I moved into accommodation. It wasn't always the case that it was as clean and as tidy as they would like to make out that it was. And you spend some time tidying it up and putting it right yourself before you moved your own stuff in, and that included things like the oven and the bathrooms. But that sort of, some of them ends up being part and parcel of what you go through when you're a tenant going into rented accommodation. You've got to make sure that you keep your records, keep your evidence, and just in case, really, if there's any problems with it. Because there are landlords out there who will teach.
Should we move on to commercial property now? I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I don't want to not give it the justice that it deserves. I think 11 minutes. Now, commercial properties. I touched on commercial properties last week, and purely because of what's been going on with Into. So Into, i.e., the owners of Mary Hill and the Trafford Centre and a fair few other, large shopping centres around the country. So I won't go back into what Into has been going on with Into, but I have a few commercial questions for you. First of all, can a tenant withhold rent or terminate a lease?
Well, there's a bit of a difficult position in terms of that, really. It's whether or not they'll be able to just simply withhold it. The rents usually, there's the clauses in the contract for it state that you can't simply offset or deduct payments due to the landlord for it, so that withholding a payment there could cause the tenant some difficulty. The best thing to do in those circumstances is for them to review the terms of the lease carefully. Look for any break clauses. So that will be a particular clause in the contract that says that a tenant's entitled to terminate the lease early by a certain date by giving notice within a certain period. They may want to look at an early exit from the agreement to try to at least limit future rent to a certain point. There could be provisions where it's turnover rent provisions, so it depends on the income generated from the premises as to whether or not rent is payable or the amount of it. Force majeure clauses, although these are rarely found in commercial leases, and there's no common law right to terminate on the basis of force majeure. Usually, it's a case that the commercial rent, it's payment without deduction or without offset. So that's usually the default position for any tenant, and I would imagine it would be for any of the Into tenants that were in those premises at the moment, albeit I think their difficulties are possibly a little removed from that to some extent, but we can probably come back to that later.
And so, can a landlord forfeit the lease and evict the tenant for non-payment of the rent then?
No, not at the moment. So the government's put in since about the 23rd of March, they've put in a restriction allowing tenants to remain at the moment and stopping landlords from being able to forfeit commercial leases. And that's been extended until the 30th of September. The difficulty for tenants there is that that's not an exemption from them paying rent, and it doesn't mean that they won't be liable for the rent, but it just prevents the landlord from seeking any kind of an eviction for non-payment of rent up until the 30th of September. So it might well be that October onwards you end up with a flood of evictions or eviction notices coming in. But it also does mean that because the landlord is effectively restrained from action that they can take until the end of September, tenants have an opportunity between now and then to talk to their landlords, make arrangements, perhaps for a rent-free period, perhaps for better rent provisions going forward. Just talking to them, saying, look, this is how my business has been affected, this is where we see our business going at the moment, and if that is then able to stay in that premises, this is what we believe we can afford to pay in terms of future rent, and trying to come to some sort of an arrangement. Now, landlords aren't in a position where people are banging the door down to fill these units. If people go, they're going to be vacant and they're going to be unoccupied. And an occupied unit's always going to be a more attractive prospect than an unoccupied unit would be, because it shows there's business going on, there's footfall, and it makes it more attractive and probably allows for a better rent to be recovered as a result of it.
I suppose, especially these smaller units, small high street units, there's you can see across the country actually a lot of high streets are boarded up. There's shops which are empty, lying bare. So if you have one of those shops where everywhere else is boarded up, maybe you've got more room to negotiate.
Yeah, you may well do. I know Wolverhampton's certainly suffering from that at the moment. There's a lot of shops in Dudley Street which are boarded up at the moment or are entirely vacant. And some of those are quite large stores that have been there for a very long time. And the landlords, or should I say the tenants who are the business owners, they've opted not to reopen the businesses.
Even up, you say Wolverhampton, going back to where my office is in Tettenhall, there's one premises on the main road on the High Street, Tettenhall High Street, which has been empty for a good, maybe nearly a year. About a year.
Yeah, I think I might know the
next to the co-op.
Unit, you mean? Yeah, just across the road from the co-op. It has been closed for quite a while, 6-7 months, I think.
No, the same side. Oh, there's one on the opposite side as well. Yeah, there's two.
Yeah. The two vacant units. It's been it's a difficult one, isn't it, in itself? And I suppose rents on the high street, even in Tettenhall, will prove to be higher than just off the high street.
Yeah.
So that might also cause a little bit of difficulty on that. But you're quite right. But then again, I did notice as well there's some businesses there, a couple of the bars there, and I think some of the estate agents took the opportunity to do a little bit of decorating during the lockdown,
spruce them up,
so they're ready for the reopening side of things. There's been I think in Tettenhall there was a bit of a wave of each, but it is a difficult one, and I think that a lot of retailers are looking to withdraw.
The bar that you're referring to, the owner of the bar was actually listening into the show a few minutes ago. I noticed him on Facebook. Yeah, he's an ex-footballer from.
I thought it was a lovely job that he did on the
right.
bar anyway. So that's still linking the compliments from me.
Moving on. So must tenants keep open or reopen the premises?
So a lot of modern commercial leases will have, particularly in the retail sector, and I suppose this is very, very topical to shopping centres, will have clauses in it so that they have to stay open, and it sort of falls in line with what I was suggesting earlier about the whole having tenants in there and footfall and business activity is positive for the shopping centre and helpful and positive for filling of the units and creating rents and such. This effectively ensures that the tenants are going to be making use of the premises during the opening hours, are going to be open, are going to be trading, so that it's more attractive for footfall, more attractive for the new tenants coming in, and it keeps the effectively business quite prosperous in terms of it keeping things open and keeping things about. The difficulty that landlords are going to have here, if they sought to try to come to the tenants against it, is in terms of keep open provisions. The regulations say that a lot of businesses had to close. And if the COVID regulation said that non-essential retail wasn't allowed to open, and shopping centres were effectively closing themselves, it's unlikely, I would have thought, that shopping centres would have sought to pursue the tenants for not opening there, because it would just be a very odd situation, really, for them to then contradict the law, as it were. In that respect, it would have been unlawful for them to have opened, it would have been unlawful for them to have traded, and they would have risked their licences in doing so. In terms of Into, though, it's an odd situation there because they have large shopping centres with a lot of businesses in them, which are still trying to trade and have just reopened. And I know the administrators are allowing Into to keep the centres open for now, and I suppose they have to, really, because otherwise it's
I suppose they'll try and I suppose the administrators will try and find a buyer.
I think they'll sell them off as a going concern, and I think they'll go in bits too. So the Trafford Centre's seen as being sort of the jewel in Into's eye, really.
Yeah,
so
and it is much more desirable to a prospective buyer if they are open rather than closed, I suppose.
Oh, for sure, yeah. So if you're seeing a lot of people coming through, footfall's increasing, that the shopping centres coping well with the pandemic, that there's still a lot of shops open, and it's a very attractive prospect to them, then sure, an investor will look upon that far more favourably than a closed shopping centre with no open stores in it. Then I suppose it becomes a prospect of it's been potentially sold to change its purpose entirely. And that might happen with some of the centres, which become unviable.
Right, let's bring this to a close. We've only got a few seconds left. So thank you again, Gavin, and thank you for your time. And if someone wants to get hold of you, how can they?
If they wish to contact me about any of this, they can contact me by email. I'm contactable on Gavin, that's Gavin, at kenneth-jones.co.uk.
Okay, brilliant. Otherwise, contact me and I'll put you in touch. Thank you very much. And guys, I'll be back next week with another show. Another topic. If you have any topics you want to discuss, please message me and I'll arrange for that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks very much.